Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely mind-bending concept that's going to challenge some of our most fundamental assumptions about reality itself. We're talking about progressive entropy theory. Honestly, if you've ever felt like traditional physics kind of leaves something out about how the universe actually creates new possibilities, well, you are definitely in the right place.
So, does nature already know its entire future? Seriously, take a second to just think about that. We usually picture the universe as this predefined box of possibilities, right? Sort of like a massive deck of cards where every single possible hand is already known before the game even starts. But what if reality isn't playing a pre-programmed game at all? What if it's literally inventing the rules as it goes?
Here's how we're going to unpack this today. First, we'll look at the state-space problem. Then we'll shift gears into the progressive viewpoint. After that, we'll break down alterity versus regularity, see why existence is actually a layered reality, and wrap up by totally redefining tipping points. Let's get into it.
Okay, part 1, the state-space problem and escaping the predefined box.
Now, think about Boltzmann, Gibbs, and Shannon. These guys are the absolute giants of thermodynamics and information theory, but they all share this massive, hidden assumption. They basically believe the total state space, meaning every single possible state a system could ever take, already exists right from the start. Boltzmann assumes all possible microstates are known. Shannon assumes all possible symbols are predetermined. But here is the crucial flaw. They're totally putting the cart before the horse. They assume this huge state space has to exist before entropy can even be calculated. If the universe actually operates like this, then nothing is ever truly new. It's just a newly selected option from a pre-existing menu. So we really have to ask, does nature actually know its entire state space right from the Big Bang?
Which brings us to section 2, the progressive viewpoint, where reality is built event by event.
Spoiler alert, the answer to that last question is a resounding no. And honestly, that realization opens up a completely new way of understanding existence. The traditional view says state space dictates entropy, meaning all possibilities are completely boxed in. But the progressive view says, wait a minute, there is no predefined menu of options. Existence only experiences the present. It's about current states, current rules, current encounters, and current events. Reality is actively writing its own history. It generates possibilities event by event rather than just passively selecting them.
So how do we actually define this? Well, progressive entropy isn't about measuring the size of some known container. Instead, it measures how much an actual event with an unknown entity forces an existing rule system to modify itself. It's defined completely without assuming a total pre-existing state space. It is all about the encounter. Basically, when nature bumps into something completely new, it's forced to adapt.
And this creates a really brilliant causal chain. It starts with the present, then an event occurs, an encounter with the unknown. This triggers a state transition, which then forces the creation of a totally new rule. And it's from that new rule that an entirely new state space is generated. The state space isn't there at step 1, it's generated way down at step 5 as a direct result of an active, unfolding reality building out its own future.
All right, section 3, alterity versus regularity. The unknown meets the rule.
This brings up a super fascinating question. What exactly is this unknown that triggers this whole chain reaction? The theory introduces a highly specific concept called alterity. Now, in standard philosophy, the other is defined in a bunch of subjective ways. But here, alterity is the raw, unknown, unregularized presence in space-time that hasn't yet been predicted or compressed into a shared protocol. Think of it like a piece of software encountering a weird file format it was never programmed to read. It's pure, untamed difference that your current rule system simply cannot process yet.
So how do we tame that unknown? Through a very precise sequence. First, we have repetition. Through repetition, we form a prediction that allows us to achieve compression of the data, which leads to sharing, and finally it crystallizes into a rule. So the exact opposite of alterity is regularity. Information itself is basically just difference that has been regularized through this exact mechanism.
And this framework brilliantly unifies two entirely different fields. Now, the theory doesn't say entropy and alterity are literally the exact same thing. Rather, they are a correspondence across different descriptive languages. The hard physics of entropy corresponds to the subjective linguistics of alterity. Information in physics corresponds to regularity in language. Physical laws correspond to stable rules. They're essentially two dialects describing the exact same underlying mechanism of reality building itself. It's pretty amazing.
Practically speaking, if a system encounters new environments, new people, or new interactions, its predictions fail. It's forced to modify its rules, which generates high progressive entropy. But if a system gets stuck in a loop where similar spatial and temporal events just repeat over and over, its predictions succeed. No new rules are needed, and the generation of new alterity drops all the way towards zero. A closed computational loop eventually just stops generating anything new entirely.
Moving on to Section 4, a layered reality. Let's look at why it's more than just a point.
Now that we understand how rules are generated, we really need to look at where they are generated. And this is one of the most critical revisions to our standard understanding of the universe. A state isn't just one thing. Our current existence is simultaneously made up of a physical state, a life state, a neural state, a language state, a social state, and a historical state. All of these different natural histories are operating at the exact same time, bound together to create the present.
So, simply put, a state is not a single point. It's a layered structure. When a state transitions, it isn't just a simple move from point A to point B. It's a wildly complex combination of transitions happening simultaneously across multiple layers of reality. Existence is fundamentally multidimensional in its structure.
And because reality is layered, entropy has to be layered too. Each domain possesses its own distinct entropy, operating at totally different speeds. For example, your physical layer right now might be highly stable, sitting in a chair, low progressive entropy. But your language or neural layers, they might be exploding with generative, high progressive entropy as you process all these crazy new concepts. Because of this, entropy isn't just a single scalar number. It has to be represented as a layer-specific vector.
Finally, Section 5, redefining tipping points. We're going way beyond simple change.
Understanding this layered structure is absolutely crucial because it forces us to completely flip how we view tipping points. We hear about tipping points all the time, right? In climate, society, economics, and we usually just think of them as a really fast, dramatic change. But progressive entropy theory debunks this entirely. A tipping point is not just a rapid change within a layer. That is a massive misunderstanding of what nature is actually doing. Instead, we get this incredibly empowering definition. A progressive tipping point is an event where a layer's entropy reaches a critical threshold, resulting in the creation of an entirely new layer, or the fundamental reorganization of existing ones. It's not just a change of state within a system, it's a change of the computational system itself. It's an act of pure genesis.
Think about it. Tipping is creation. When alterity pushes a system past its limit, the system doesn't just adapt its rules. It spawns an entirely new layer of reality to process that unknown. This is exactly how the universe scales its own complexity.
And that brings us to our ultimate takeaway. Natural history is not a world with a pre-existing state space, but a world that historically generates it. We aren't living inside some static, predefined box mapped out at the Big Bang. We live in a vibrant, progressive universe that meets the unknown, modifies its rules, and writes its own magnificent possibilities into existence, event by event. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I'm going to leave you with this final thought. If reality is actively generating new state spaces every time it encounters the unknown, what new layer of reality are your actions generating right now?